Veganism could have been a wonderful thing. The premise of living causing the least amount of harm is objectively good. It could teach the masses the benefits of eating a varied diet. But unfortunately, it developed into an absolutist wet dream, where someone can be vegan for 10 years, but God forbid, once a year they go to their grandma's house and eat her non-vegan food. Instead of helping each other, vegans try to surpass each other by proving they are the veganest vegan.
Whereas now, it's not that I don't feel happy when I meet another vegan, but I meet another vegan and I kind of go, and what kind of vegan are you?
The earth is the best. That's why I'm a vegetarian.
Well, that's a start.
I was thinking of going vegan.
I'm a level 5 vegan. I won't eat anything that casts a shadow.
Wow.
I will now try to address morality in a scientific way, which is as effective as trying to rationalize emotions. If you value the life of cows and pigs as much as humans, then I understand why you simply cannot see them as food. Even so, I must go there. Hopefully I'll be able to reach someone who is still on the fence before they get completely involved with the movement, or perhaps I can help someone who wants to leave the movement to rationalize their decisions. Veganism from the point of view of morality is simply hypocritical. Omnivores are called speciesists because we see dogs and cats as companions, but we see cows and pigs as food. But vegans, arguably, are also speciesists. We love one and kill the other because we live in a time where we are privileged to choose. A pig can be a pet. You have the right to do it. But in the wise words of Sokka,
You're awfully cute, but unfortunately for you, you're made of meat.
during many events throughout the years, food was so scarce that not even pets or rats were safe. I'm sure we're all familiar with the story of the plane crash and the extremes that the people that had to do to survive. So I don't believe it is inherently bad to eat other animals. We do it if we have to, and hopefully I have proven already that most people cannot feed themselves on vegetables alone. But veganism is about causing the least amount of harm, so avoiding animal foods when possible seems to be the moral thing to do. Vegans seem to jump between the moral argument and the environmental argument, and I admit, those two are connected. But we should try to isolate and tackle the two issues separately, or the conversation runs the risk of going in circles. Let's ignore for now the environmental impacts of animals and crops in agriculture. For the next few minutes, I will simply talk about the actual deaths in numbers. Most vegan debates would show me the following website, which estimates the number of animals needed to be killed in order to produce 1 million calories of food. We can see that they have divided the deaths in two categories, slaughter and harvest. But seems a bit disingenuous to only include these two. Since plants cannot be slaughtered, we will replace slaughter in case of plants with plantation. Plantation includes the clearing of habitat, use of pesticides and fertilization. Since vegans do not want to use organic growth factor that comes from the animal agriculture, aka manure, we will have to use the less biological available chemical option. So we have indirect killing from destruction of habitat and the preparation of the soil. Then as the year progresses, we spread pesticides that kill any ladybugs, lizards, mice, birds, squirrels, frogs, snakes, rabbits, small fauna like deer, not to mention the use of honeybees, and the death numbers are in the thousands, if not millions. Only after all those deaths, this following study was conducted. It measures the death of field mice after it was harvested. So in the website presented, only a very, very small number of deaths in harvest was considered. The author ignored the field preparation and post-habitat destruction. No other animals were mentioned. I wonder if this would skew the numbers. The following study reference states, higher meat diets used a large share of the available cropland suited only to pasture and perennial crops, meaning that cropland that cows are grown in are only good for grass and maybe a few trees. The USDA estimates that 2/3 of arable land is no good for crops. It is either too uneven, too rocky, or bad for any other reason. This means that if we don't use the land to grow ruminants like cows and sheep, that the land would probably be wasted. It is a common statement of vegan propaganda that 80 to 90% of crop production is fed to animals. Or the derivative, we could feed more people if we gave the food we give to animals to humans instead. And of course the corollary develops which goes something like, if crops kill animals, animal farming kills animals twice over, and so it is more moral to be vegan. These statements are completely false. Animals don't get a portion of our food, they get what's left of it. If you are a corn farmer, your best crops are going to be sold for human consumption, simply because it pays much better. What's left will go to oil production, other human uses, and only then what's left goes to feed. Cattle is mostly grass-fed, and then finished with grain to fatten up. The vegans on this thread were so close to figuring it out, but they just missed the mark. Soybeans contain only about 17 to 20% of oil. The rest is made into soybean meal that is used for livestock. Even if we got perfect extraction, just the production of oil alone would cover the poultry and beef agriculture. And the beauty of this graph is that it tells you that 7% of the livestock feed is directly from soybeans, meaning that 93% of the soy production is for human use. The leftover we feed to animals that in turn give us food. Not to mention all the other uses that animals provide us. The argument that US could feed 800 million people with the grain that livestock eat is misleading, since it only looks at the weight of the food and not what the food actually is. So taking all of this into account, we can see how a graph like this is full of errors and assumptions. The following graph is, however, based on reality. We did not touch on other sufferings like we see in factory farming, but we also have not touched on the suffering that monocultures cause to actual humans. And, for example, things like cashews have toxins in them that destroy the health of human workers. And yet, this whole website, all these studies, all my arguments and all the vegan arguments in regards to human versus animal feed have a major hole. The thing that has been staring at us this whole time that disproves all vegan arguments and makes my arguments mute. Calories. The ones of you paying attention probably noticed this issue a long time ago. We are talking about deaths in regards to calories. Ask anyone in the field of nutrition and science. Not only calories are needed to feed humans to survive. Otherwise we would only eat plant sugar cane and potatoes, since those are the most calorically dense foods. Nutrition is important, not calories. I went to large extents in the previous part of the video to justify this statement. In terms of nutrition, not all calories are created equal. For example, 1 liter of Coca-Cola has about 420 calories. 100 grams of beef liver only has 139. You know of course where I'm going with this, but let's compare the nutrients. This Coca-Cola versus beef liver is of course an hyperbolization, and I'm doing so to prove a point. Calories don't matter. The graph presented by vegans, carnivores or others in regards to calories does not really matter. Calories only matter if your lifestyle provides you with enough nutrients to survive and you are privileged enough to either limit the number of calories to lose weight or raise the calories consumed to gain weight. Hopefully you see now that evaluating the number of deaths per calorie is just silly. So how does our initial graph hold up in terms of nutrients? Let's take into account, let's say, B12. This is just one nutrient. Please don't forget all the others that are either not present in a vegan diet or are simply in too little quantities. Is factory farming cruel? Yes. Do crop-fed animals cause more animal deaths and suffering than just crops by themselves? Absolutely. But can eating meat cause less suffering for the animals than vegan diets? 100%. People who are vegan for ethical reasons will have a hard time understanding this. They value the life of a cow and a pig the same or even higher than human. Meaning that given the choice of suffering of an animal or the suffering of a person, they would let the person suffer to save the animal, even if that person is themselves. And if you think I'm exaggerating, here are a few examples.
If a doctor told me today
totally about
that veganism would kill me, I would continue to be vegan.
What if you went to the doctors tomorrow and the doctor told you, Stephanie, you're not going to live past 25 if you continue this lifestyle?
I would probably continue the lifestyle.
you would not eat animals if you knew you were gonna die in a month if you didn't.
No.
if you say-
I wouldn't. I don't care.
I believe this is the main reason that veganism is seen as a religion or a cult. It defies reason by putting their beliefs above their lives. If you are in this situation, perhaps this video is not for you. Perhaps you are suffering. You feel it, but your empathy for the animals is just too much of a mental block. Another option for you is bivalves. Some bivalves like clams, mussels, oysters are more like plants than animals. They don't have a sense of self nor pain receptors, so consuming them can be very nutritious and as moral as consuming plants. As an added bonus, by growing bivalves we can help clean our rivers and oceans. Yes, they are alive, but so are plants. Both don't have a brain nor a central nervous system. 100 grams of bivalves will provide you with the bioavailability protein, iron, zinc, but most importantly, vitamin B12 and DHA EPA omega-3s that vegan diets desperately need. There is no cruelty-free diet. Let's not fool ourselves. Vegans want to cause the least amount of harm, but perhaps we can come together with a solution to the least amount of harm to humans, animals, and the planet. And with that smooth segue, we have reached the third part of the video: animals and the environment. I propose another question. Shouldn't we first try to figure out what lifestyle is better for us and make that one the best thing for the animals and the world? And if a diet with plenty of meat, fish, dairy, eggs and vegetables, aka the only diets that for sure are better than anything else observed so far, and if diets like these are the best for us, can they also help the environment? Ruminants are the key to what is called regenerative agriculture and holistic management. This, I believe, is what's best for humans and our planet alike. For those of you who haven't watched this TED Talk, I would suggest you pause this video. Go watch it. It will help you understand the next section. Even if you would disagree with everything I said so far, I hope this video can make you see that using ruminants can be extremely beneficial to our planet. In this talk, you will hear Professor Savory mention how he had proven, scientifically, and many of his colleagues agreed, that herbivores were causing habitat destruction at an alarming rate. This led to the unfortunate death of thousands of animals in order to save the lands from desertification. And yet, the natural destruction or desertification simply got worse. Professor Savory defends that we should use cows, sheep, and goats in such a way that we mimic nature. Put them to graze and move from area to area. This would make previous deserts full with life, and this life would be taking greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and putting them in the ground and the soil in a process named carbon sequestration. This idea of trying to help nature heal itself was of course received positively by everyone, and no single scientist said anything about it ever.
Fuck.
So of course some scientists and journalists have disagreed with Professor Savory and his claims that holistic agriculture could save us from environmental disaster. This is a good thing. Science is proud to be distinguishable from religion exactly because it takes nothing for certain, not even proven theories. So this document englobes purely the environmental impact of livestock and the production of greenhouse gases from it. No morality or nutritional values are taken into account, which is very refreshing to see. A pure scientific report, lacking the hallmarks of political correctness. This report also tears down the extremist positions that say that animal agriculture is responsible for the majority of the greenhouse gas emissions and the main culprit of climate change. The main report we are looking at also explains what carbon sequestration is and how it works. It is accepted by everyone that our soils can indeed store greenhouse gases. Most of the CO2 absorbed by plants would be released back into the atmosphere once the plants died. But over time, the soil would retain some carbon compounds that can stay there for hundreds of years as long as the soil remains healthy. What is being argued is not the fact that soil can sequester carbon, but the effectiveness of cattle in helping the soil doing so. Do cows cause so much damage that the benefits are actually insignificant? Or is cattle the only way that we can naturally save the planet, just like Professor Savory mentioned? The document itself asks what land management approaches hold potential to sequester more carbon. What are their risks and limitations? And right afterwards they mention that planting trees or fertilizing crops with manure has the potential to sequester carbon, proving what Dr. Savory said. Trees are probably the best sources of carbon sequestration there is. They can store it for decades, and their deep roots can help fix carbon better than anything else. So deforestation for animal agriculture is no good, but so is deforestation for monocrops. I don't really see why scientists are fighting on this topic. Another point on this report made against Professor Savory is that the cattle overgrazing destroys the soil. But doesn't overfarming do the same thing? The solution presented by Professor Savory is not to simply increase the number of cattle, but to do so in a planned way where cattle moves from area to area to stop overgrazing and boost mineral distribution. So has holistic management actually helped the soil recover? Here are some examples. Not only Professor Savory showed examples where this worked, but also other farmers from around the world have utilized Professor Savory's techniques in order to make their soil recover. And they have proof that is so clear you can literally see a line that divides the soil where holistic management was being done and soil where nature was done to be left alone. In many cases the soil went from barren to green. I think we can say safely that this is proof that the method works. It improves the soil and helps reduce greenhouse gases that cause climate change. The document recognizes the results, but has two major criticisms. 1. Risk of displacement or leakage. One might, for example, enhance soil carbon stocks in one area by applying large inputs of organic matter, basically saying that soil is more rich because the nutrients that are there now have been received from another area, and so the net positive of both areas is now 0. The second major criticism: misleading conclusions are sometimes drawn about the sequestration effects of a particular land management regime. For example, sequestration in a grassland may be credited to a particular grazing regime, when this in fact is the legacy and effect of the land's much earlier conversion from arable grasslands. For point number 1, the same document explains how cattle can actually bring a net positive to the soil. It states, in fact, grazing can positively stimulate plant growth, while, as noted, the nutrients in the dung can further aid this process. But appropriate grazing does not only stimulate above ground biomass production, leading to these cycling effects of described above. The key aspect of interest when it comes to the sequestration is the effects of the animal grazing on root growth. High root growth is needed to support high rates of net pasture growth. If plants respond to the grazing stimulus by putting down new roots, then the carbon is already on the ground and has a better chance of being retained there, where it may eventually be converted into more stable forms. So the document itself is again confirming that this can actually work. The second point in my view is very weak. If the soil has been barren for decades, it is very unlikely that it can heal itself in such a profound way in such a short amount of time without human intervention.
Right there! Coincidence? I think not!
The main argument against animal agriculture in regards to greenhouse gases is the amount of methane that produced by herbivores. Methane, being a much worse greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide or CO2, would mean that animal agriculture actual emissions would be far superior than anything else that humans do. Ruminant animals release a lot of this gas through a process called enteric fermentation. In order for ruminants to get their nutrition, they ingest a lot of cellulose-rich plants like grass. Their gut microbiome then ferments and turns it into nutrients, but also methane. This is usually the damning evidence proposed by many environmental scientists against beef consumption, saying that methane production from ruminant animals is the drive or its absence the solution to climate change is simply and completely erroneous. Everything in our planet is ruled by a cycle. Water, for example, after evaporation does not stay indefinitely in our atmosphere. At some point it rains down and the cycle begins anew. The same goes for methane released by animals. After exiting the animal, it does go into the atmosphere and it stays there for around 10 years before it's broken down, absorbed by the plants, before being eaten by the animals, and the cycle begins again. But the methane and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has grown, meaning something is interfering with this cycle. Methane in the atmosphere has indeed increased since the Industrial Revolution, but since methane is composed by carbon and hydrogen, where was all this throughout human history? Why have we seen an increase only in recent history? So that means that these greenhouse gases have to come from somewhere else. But where, I wonder? What a mystery. I wonder where it's coming from. Jokes aside, the carbon that we have now in the atmosphere, causing climate change, came from underground. Any other source pales in comparison to fossil fuels. We burn fuels like oil and gas that we take from underground, and this releases carbon, like CO2 and of course methane, into our atmosphere. We are trying to develop technologies that can take carbon from the air so we can bury it. If it is true that herbivores can turn deserts into fertile land, that means we already have that technology. Expanding our cattle herds could be beneficial to our planet. Cattle, when used correctly, will help reforest our world.
Transforming barren areas of parched earth into forests rich in biodiversity. Biodiversity corridors are areas of vegetation that allow animals to travel from one patch of native forest to another. A corridor provides shelter, food and protection from many predators by imitating the structure and diversity of native vegetation.
I will address quickly other arguments against animal agriculture that I feel hold less water either in practicality or in terms of rationality. Don't you know that deforestation is caused by animal agriculture? Animals need much more land than plants, so if we eliminate animal agriculture, we would only use a portion of the land to grow crops, and the Amazon forest would still be intact. This argument is demonstrably false. Cropland and animal land are not interchangeable. Crops need a nutrient-rich soil and appropriate weather to grow. Animals can use the leftover land to graze. Ironically, cattle could create more arable land out of the deserts if holistic management is to bring solutions. What about all the water used for animals? If we measure by weight, not by percentage like some apologists do, cattle uses more blue or fresh water than, let's say, oats. But if we measure in terms of nutrients that the food gives us, then I would say that cattle is worth it. However, if you are still not convinced and you are worried about our water consumption, then you should cut other foods like almonds and other nuts. If I'm allowed at least one small conspiracy theory, I would like to mention the fact that every time we try to clamp down on fossil fuel industries like Shell or BP, something comes up that redirects the blame to us regular people.
Well, because the only reason we even know what a carbon footprint is thanks to a massive appropriation of the term by BP, British Petroleum, and their 2005 advertising campaign. You might know BP from their shocking lack of a fun facts section on Wikipedia. Or maybe you know them from this ad, in which they took the bright-eyed ecological footprint stepping off the bus in the big city and turned it into the red carpet attending, gala hosting, movie star carbon footprint we all know and love.
Investigations by The Guardian and Inside Climate News have reported on ExxonMobil's history of funding and promoting climate change denial, and in the book Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway, it is mentioned the several tactics that curb public outrage. Shouldn't they be the ones to create the solutions to prevent catastrophe? I believe that oil companies are also behind these kind of campaigns, but I have no proof for it. It is just a conspiracy. At least for now. Pure veganism has failed many people. People have shed the vegan label because it's a difficult and an unpleasant diet, but also because of the many health problems that it brings. We also know that people lie to either keep their public image or because they are ashamed to admit that they have failed at something considered to be good. Veganism is not a complete diet. You have to take supplements in order to make it work. This is said by vegan doctors, not me, and is not up for debate. Adding to that, issues with conversion and absorption, and we can see how many people would not be able to stay vegan and not suffer even if they wanted to. Reducing our meat intake is also a preposterous proposition, since most of us are already protein and iron deficient. In fact, it seems that veganism is quite anti-women, since women on average are already protein deficient and iron deficient more than men. Some people will not be able to change their ideology even if it costs them their lives. But I hope I made a good argument regarding supplementing the diet with bivalves. They are alive like plants. Some of them move as do plants. But just like plants, they don't feel pain. We should indeed reduce suffering when we can. Perhaps it is too idealistic, but if we could give these animals a good life, with abundant food, space and protection against disease and predators, would that not be better than in the wild where it's cold and dangerous? One thing that we all agree with is factory farming should at some point stop. It won't be as efficient, but we sure have the resources to spare. Making meat cost more money would not be a good solution, since the rich would still buy it. More grassland for ruminants could be created thanks to nature mimicking practices that also sequester greenhouse gases into the soil and maybe, I'm being too hopeful, but even create new croplands. Methane is a non-factor in animal agriculture. It is part of a 10 to 12 year cycle, and the number of cattle has remained steady for the past 20 years. The beef consumption actually decreased almost 20%. How has this not have a significant result according to vegan scientists? As already mentioned, the numbers provided in Livestock's Long Shadow and all the studies that reference it have been debunked. And anyone trying to assert claims like animal production has more impact than transportation is lying and has been debunked several times. Animal agriculture still causes a lot of greenhouse gases, and those should be addressed. Scientists are working in all fronts. But saying that eating less meat will cause a significant loss is quite erroneous and outright a lie. Moreover, these ideas are dangerous because they take our vision from the real problem of fossil fuels.
Wow, this video took way longer than I thought. Research started about 2 years ago, when I was doing a debunk for the Game Changers, and it kept just getting bigger and bigger. I would like to thank the YouTuber Moller, aka The Long Man, whose writing style I completely ripped off. I tried to ask for permission with no answer, so I do hope he sees it as a compliment through imitation, rather than just simply stealing. This video was made much better thanks to the efforts of channels like Tom Loris or Veganphobic, whom the clips you saw throughout the video. Other channels that inspired me to make my own were What I've Learned, Madlife Crisis, and others. I will just put them in the screen. Lastly, I would like to thank the people on the subreddits, channels that supported veganism, anti-veganism, carnivore diets, nutrition diets in general, dietitians in general. Some of the people were of course quite rude, but most of them were actually quite helpful. Other sources that I studied but they did not make it directly into the video will be in the description. I'll put some of them on the screen as well. And finally, if you've reached this far, I would like to thank you. This was a project of love, which I thought about giving up many times, but I'm really happy I stuck to it till the end. If I may ask you to like, subscribe, and perhaps leave a comment with your thoughts, questions, or just a pirate flag, so I know you've reached this far and to confuse everyone else. It is a wild sea out there, and I tend to explore every corner of it.